You know Cinderella as a story of glass slippers and fairy godmothers, but the most famous version ever printed ordered stepsisters to slice off their own toes and heels just to fit into a golden shoe. The Brothers Grimm original tale was nothing like Disney's fantasy. It ends with mutilation and blindness, not a magical escape. So why did a children's story begin with brutal violence? And what terrifying realities was it reflecting? The answer changes everything you think you know about this legendary tale. Let's start with the words that shocked generations. In the Brothers Grimm's first edition of Aschenputtel, the moment of reckoning arrives not with magic, but with a knife. The stepmother, watching the prince search for his bride, turns to her daughter and instructs her to cut off her toe. The words are plain: cut off your toe. When you are queen, you will have no more need to go on foot. Blood stains the golden slipper, but the deception goes unnoticed until white doves cry out, exposing the truth. The second sister faces her own test. The command is just as stark: cut a piece off your heel. When you are queen, you will have no more need to go on foot. Again, the shoe fills with blood. The prince, guided by the doves, sees the red soaking through the gold. In this version, there is no gentle trial, no fairy's intervention, only the raw cost of trying to fit. The text does not flinch or soften. For generations, these lines stood in print, demanding readers confront the price exacted by ambition and the lengths a family might go to secure a place at court. The Cinderella most people know, complete with glass slipper, fairy godmother, and pumpkin coach, owes its shape not to German folklore, but to the French court of Louis XIV. In 1697, Charles Perrault published Cinderella, or The Little Glass Slipper, in his collection of tales, crafting a version that sparkled with magic and forgiveness. Perrault's Cinderella is transformed by a fairy godmother, rides to the ball in a pumpkin-turned carriage, and leaves behind a delicate glass slipper as proof of her identity. The story ends not with punishment, but with reconciliation. The stepsisters are forgiven and married off, the heroine's suffering washed away in a wave of benevolence. This French telling, written for aristocratic salons, softened the tale's edges. The glass slipper, transparent, fragile, and beautiful, became the centerpiece, a symbol of purity revealed rather than endurance tested. These motifs, so familiar from storybooks and film, never appeared in the Brothers Grimm's early texts. The golden slipper, the absence of a fairy godmother, and the lack of magical transformation mark a clear divide. The icons that fill modern imaginations with wonder are Perrault's invention, not the Grimm's. Across the German-speaking lands of the 17th and 18th centuries, the shadow of loss stretched over nearly every household. For women, childbirth was as dangerous as it was common. Parish records from Württemberg and Westphalia show that on average, 1.2% of women died with each birth. In the mid-1600s, that figure climbed even higher, to 1.7%. With most women bearing multiple children, the odds of surviving every birth were slim. A family might celebrate a new baby and mourn a mother in the same week. These numbers were not just statistics, they shaped the very structure of daily life. When a mother died, the home became a site of crisis. Widowers left with infants and young children faced a choice that was rarely sentimental. The household needed a new anchor. In most cases, a widower remarried within 1 to 3 years. The new wife, often younger, arrived to take charge of the children, the kitchen, and the fields. Parish registers tell the story again and again. A burial entry for a woman in the spring, a marriage for her husband by the next harvest. This pattern repeated across towns and villages. In Württemberg, a single decade might see dozens of such cycles, with fathers remarrying at a steady pace. The need was practical. Children needed care, the farm or shop needed management, and the community expected households to remain stable. Widows, by contrast, remarried far less often. Without property or legal authority, many could not attract a new husband or keep their children under the same roof. The result was a world where stepmothers outnumbered stepfathers by a wide margin. The arrival of a stepmother did not erase the memory of the first wife. Instead, it created a blended household, sometimes peaceful, often tense. Children from the first marriage shared beds and chores with new half-siblings. Inheritance lines blurred. A stepmother's loyalty, by custom and necessity, tilted toward her own children. Parish accounts from the Rhineland and Bavaria show that as many as 10 to 15% of households included stepchildren, sometimes more during years of plague or famine. In hard times, the number of blended families surged, and with them the potential for rivalry and resentment. The churn of death and remarriage left its mark on the young. Many stepchildren were under 10, the age when they most needed care and protection. The records show their vulnerability. A stepdaughter once essential to her mother's daily work could become surplus labor when a new wife arrived. Some were sent into service, others married off early or given the least food and the hardest chores. For every household that managed to blend peacefully, there were others where competition for resources, food, dowry, and inheritance turned the home into a battleground. This was not a rare exception, but the ordinary rhythm of life. The story of Aschenputtel, with its stepmother and stepsisters, reflects a reality that parish registers and household accounts confirm. In the world of the Grimms, the stepfamily was not a fairy tale invention, but a demographic certainty born from the relentless toll of childbirth, the urgency of remarriage, and the fragile structure of early modern European households. In households shaped by loss and remarriage, the dangers facing stepchildren went far beyond emotional neglect. Modern forensic studies, drawing on child welfare records from Canada, the UK, and the United States, have uncovered a pattern that echoes through centuries. Children living with a step-parent are, on average, 16 times more likely to suffer abuse or fatal harm than those raised by both biological parents. This figure, replicated across countries and decades, does not explain individual tragedies, but it reveals a structural danger embedded deep in the family tree. The so-called Cinderella effect is not a fable. It is a statistical warning that casts a long shadow backward over the world that produced Aschenputtel. The peril was not only physical. In early modern Europe, marriage was rarely about romance. Across German-speaking lands, the average age of first marriage rose into the mid-20s for women and the late 20s for men. This was no accident. The Western European marriage pattern, as historians call it, delayed marriage until a young person had spent years working as a servant or apprentice, saving wages, and gathering the resources needed to form an independent household. For most, marriage meant leaving home, not joining an extended family. It was a leap into a new economic unit, one that required careful negotiation and often hard compromise. Dowries were at the heart of these negotiations. A daughter's marriage could drain a household's savings, sometimes threatening the inheritance of every child. In regions governed by primogeniture, the rule that the eldest son inherited the bulk of the estate, daughters' prospects depended on the size of the dowry their family could muster. For a stepmother, the arrival of a stepdaughter was not just a test of kindness, but a financial calculation. Every coin set aside for a stepdaughter's dowry was a coin not saved for her own children. Every marriageable girl in the house became a competitor in a zero-sum game. Records from parish registers and household accounts show that these tensions played out in real time. In a blended family, a stepdaughter might be denied a dowry, sent into service, or married off quickly to a lesser match, simply to reduce the burden on the household. The stepmother's loyalty, by law and custom, tilted toward her own offspring. The dowry system turned daughters into rivals and stepdaughters into outsiders, sometimes even into servants within their own homes. The economic logic was relentless. Inheritance customs in many German territories meant that land and goods could not be divided endlessly. Each new marriage and each additional child threatened to split the estate further, leaving everyone poorer. Families responded by rationing opportunity. A stepdaughter with no dowry faced a bleak future, years of labor as a servant, or marriage to a man with little to offer. The home, meant to be a place of safety, became a battleground for resources and survival. Marriage was the escape route, but only for those who could afford the price of entry. The golden slipper in the Grimm tale was more than a test of beauty. It was a symbol of social and economic fitness. Only the girl who could fit, whose body, reputation, and dowry matched the demands of the marriage market, would be chosen. For the rest, the path narrowed to drudgery, dependence, or exile. The statistics of modern child welfare do not describe the past directly, but they illuminate the risks that stepchildren have always faced. The story of Aschenputtel is not just a warning about cruelty, it is a record of the dangers built into a systems where family ties could be severed by death and new alliances forged by need. The numbers tell us what the stories already knew. In a world ruled by inheritance, service, and the economics of marriage, not every child stood an equal chance. In early modern German households, the word Ash girl was more than a nickname. It was a social sentence. Aschenputtel's place in the kitchen, sleeping by the hearth and covered in soot, mapped directly onto the realities of domestic service. By the 19th century, census records across Prussia and Bavaria show that 60 to 80% of household servants were female, most of them young and unmarried. Servants were overwhelmingly women. Entering service was not a matter of choice for many girls. It was a legal status recognized by contracts that defined their labor and stripped away most protections. Servants could be dismissed at will, beaten within limits, and denied the right to marry without their employer's approval. For a stepdaughter, being sent into service was both an economic calculation and a warning: you are not one of us. The home itself was a hierarchy, and the Ash girl sat at the bottom. While the stepmother's daughters might hope for marriage, Aschenputtel's prospects narrowed to drudgery. Her body, her hands, her back, her feet became her only currency. Yet even this was not enough. In the world that produced the Grimm's tale, beauty was a form of capital, and nowhere was this more visible than in the cult of the tiny foot. Portraits from the 18th century show noble women with impossibly small slippers, feet daintily displayed as proof of refinement. Fashion plates and etiquette manuals praised narrow feet as a sign of gentility. A woman with small feet did not labor, did not walk far, and belonged to a higher world. The golden shoe in Aschenputtel is not a random test. It is a measure of status as much as anatomy. The pressure to fit this ideal was not abstract. Shoes were made deliberately narrow, and women squeezed their feet into them, risking pain and deformity. Medical treatises from the period mention bunions, calluses, and even lameness caused by fashionable footwear. The stepsister's willingness to cut off a toe or a heel is not an invention of cruelty, but a reflection of the lengths to which families might go for a daughter to ascend. The mother's command that when you are queen, "You will have no more need to go on foot," is a cold calculation, weighing flesh against fortune. But the violence of the household did not end at the kitchen door. The law itself sanctioned mutilation as punishment. The Constitutio Criminalis Carolina, passed in 1532 and enforced across the Holy Roman Empire for centuries, spelled out a menu of bodily penalties. Fingers, ears, noses, even hands and feet could be cut off for crimes ranging from theft to dishonor. These punishments were not hidden. They were carried out in public squares, at market days, or before church doors, designed to shame as much as to correct. A woman marked by mutilation bore her crime on her body for life, a visible warning to others. This logic of spectacle found its way into the Grimm's 1819 revision of Aschenputtel. At the royal wedding, as the church filled with witnesses, 2 doves descended and pecked out the stepsisters' eyes. The punishment was not private vengeance, but public justice, enacted at the very moment of triumph. The ritual space of the church became a courtroom, and the blinded sisters became living evidence of the cost of deceit. The Grimm's editorial choice to add this scene was deliberate. Scholars like Jack Zipes and Maria Tatar have traced how the brothers, across successive editions, replaced biological mothers with stepmothers and intensified punishments for villains. Their aim was not just to record folklore, but to enforce a vision of order, one where the boundaries of family, status, and law were written on the body itself. In the end, the tale's violence is not a flourish, but a mirror. The Ash Girl's servitude, the cult of the tiny foot, the normalization of mutilation, and the spectacle of blinding all point to a world where the struggle for status and survival left lasting marks. The story's brutality is legible because it was lived in kitchens, in courts, and in the pages of the law. In the earliest editions of the Grimm tales, the figure of the stepmother is not just a narrative device. It is the result of deliberate editorial change. Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm often replaced biological mothers with stepmothers, even when their oral sources named the mother as the antagonist. This pattern appears across their collections, including Aschenputtel. Scholars Maria Tatar and Jack Zipes have traced how the Grimms, in successive editions from 1812 onward, preserved the sanctity of motherhood by shifting blame onto stepmothers. The result is a moral landscape where the mother's role is protected, while the stepmother becomes the vessel for cruelty and punishment. This editorial decision shaped not just the story, but the way generations came to understand family, virtue, and villainy. Each new edition of the Grimm's tales brought harsher consequences for villains. By 1819, punishments were sharpened, making the stepsisters' fate a clear warning. Scholars note this editorial pattern. The Grimms raised the cost of cruelty to deliver an unmistakable lesson. Fairy tales still shape how we imagine innocence, cruelty, and what it takes to survive a family. Yet the realities that forged Aschenputtel, including household violence, legal mutilation, and the price of beauty, persist in subtler forms. Today, stepchildren remain at greater risk, and society still asks who deserves to fit the slipper. The oldest stories hide truths we are still not ready to face. What do you see in the ashes?